If he'd done such a wonderful job, he listed all his accomplishments, why did he have to go? I mean, why?
Well, again, this is based on a conversation between the two of them about what the next 2 years of this administration is going to look like. And based on what those priorities are going to be over the next 2 years, both men determined that it is an appropriate time for Secretary Hagel to step down and for someone else to take the reins over at the Pentagon.
Chuck Hagel is nothing more than a lame duck Secretary of Defense at the moment, and already we're getting word that not everybody is chomping at the bit to fill his seat. This, as American military readiness comes into question, and if the president wants to surround himself with nothing but sycophants. Let's welcome to MidPoint former three-star general who served his country proudly for 35 years, former Army Assistant Chief of Staff for Operations, and author of books such as Why We Lost, Lieutenant General Daniel Bolger. Lieutenant General, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Ed.
Can we say that Chuck Hagel was actually fired, or did he just plain out become disgusted one day and say, I got to get out of here?
Well, right now we don't really know. It was handled in the way these things are normally handled. A nice little meeting yesterday, press availability by the President and Secretary Hagel. But it'll take a little while before we find out if he was left on his own call or if he was pushed.
What would be your guess then, knowing what goes on there and how business is done and how this was conducted?
Secretary Hagel's a guy with a lot of integrity. He speaks his mind. He was an elected Republican senator, but he did disagree with the war in Iraq in 2003 and made his thoughts known to the Bush administration and the American public. The other thing folks should remember, he is a Vietnam veteran. He was an infantry sergeant in the 9th Infantry Division, wounded twice, received the Purple Heart twice. I mean, this is a guy who knows what war's about, and he does speak his mind. Maybe he spoke it once too much.
What about those people who say that, and again, knowing that he full well has a background in the military here, though, but that things had changed drastically, and he simply was in, and some people have said this, and some have said it sniping on his way out of the White House as well, that he was in over his head with the current needs of the American military?
Yeah, well, most of the people saying that have never served a day in uniform. If they had done half of what Chuck Hagel did, they'd be a little bit more understanding. What he's doing is raising, and he has raised, good cautions about the use of military force. He's one of the first guys to identify the threat from ISIS and to do so publicly when other people were not so worried about them. He has been a strong advocate for our soldiers, families, veterans, and not just soldiers, but sailors, airmen, Marines as well, and their families. He's walked in those boots, and it gives him a great amount of credibility with our force. He's going to be a strong voice that we're going to miss.
Is this just the president trying to stack his cabinet, if you will, with people who will nod their heads, yes, every time he says something, and not disagree with him?
Could be. I mean, every president has the opportunity to choose their cabinet, and history tells us that as an administration goes on, there is a tendency to get more and more like-minded people. I know the president publicly stated early on that he wanted to get open-minded people. He intentionally appointed Mrs. Hillary Clinton, for example, as Secretary of State, even though she'd run against him in a very contested primary. You know, that trying to get a bunch of open minds around you is important. The president needs to hear all points of view. And one thing we should remember is that the uniformed military, particularly the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, he hasn't left office, and he's still available to provide the best military advice, as are all the chiefs of service, the Commandant of the Marines, the Chief of Staff of the Army, the Air Force, and the Chief of Naval Operations. They're all readily available if the president wants to hear from military folks.
With what you just said then, about the minute we have left before we take a break, with Chuck Hagel gone, but with certain people still in place in running the military, do you see there being any real change whatsoever in how this military is run at this point? Because aren't most of the suggestions coming from the guys actually who have the quote-unquote boots on the ground at the moment?
Well, right. We normally do defer to the field commanders, and their recommendations haven't changed just because the Secretary of Defense is about to leave office. But we should keep in mind this type of a change at the top sometimes is the opening round of an overall change in policy. So we'll have to see.
What would you hope that change in policy would be?
I would hope that we would stay the course with ISIS, with the Iraqis in the lead, our folks in support, air power, intel, and advisory help. I hope it is not more boots on the ground. We've tried that twice already, once in Iraq, once in Afghanistan. Americans can't take the lead in a counterinsurgency.
All right, hold on to that thought because you've actually started to talk where we're going to go right after the break. More with Lieutenant General Daniel Bolger after we take a short time out. We will focus on those changes in American military war strategy with whomever comes in as the new Secretary of Defense. And at 34 minutes after the hour, the war being waged on Christianity by those determined to see their faith overtake the world. It's not getting any better, and Christians are still waiting for help. That and so much more, right here on MidPoint, where we question everything. Let's welcome back to MidPoint retired U.S. Army three-star Lieutenant General Daniel Bolger. Lieutenant General, let's get down to strategy again here right now because we continue to talk about this. If there is going to be a change here, is there going to be a change? Is there any hope whatsoever that you have that we actually have a strategy, or is this for the president just another dodge to take up time and keep America from seeing a real thinking process on defeating an enemy?
No, I think we've got a strategy, Ed. It's not one that's going to make people happy because it doesn't promise an immediate response. Our great U.S. military, the men and women in our military, are trained for rapid, decisive operations, a desert storm, if you will. And what we're doing right now is we're supporting the Iraqis as they carry out a counterinsurgency, which is more like a Vietnam situation. It's going to last a long time. It's going to be messy. But the smart thing we've done this time compared to what we did from 03 to 11 is we're not trying to run it ourselves. We're going to let them take the lead. We're going to back them up. They'll take forever to do it, and it won't be done to our standards. But the important thing is it'll keep ISIS busy over there so they don't have time to organize terrorist training camps and threaten the United States. They'd love to do that, but when they're on the run from the Iraqis and from our Air Force, they're not going to be able to.
Building on what you just said here, has this president, Barack Obama, learned that the American military is not suited to just being a bunch of caretakers and teachers, which it seems as if they've been turned into? Is he actually going to understand that?
I do think he does. I know certainly the senior military folks do, and I'd count myself, although I'm out of the service now, as one of them. That's a hard lesson learned over the last more than 10 years of fighting since 9/11. To quote former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, we don't need U.S. Marines walking children to school. That's not our job. Our job is to go in, kick the door down, knock out the enemy forces, and get out of there.
Then let's go ahead and build on that as well, because Chuck Hagel was very adamant. He wanted the focus to be on Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian regime. So if we're going to go in and kick down some doors, I mean, let's just take this to the next level here. Is that the door that we've got to kick down, or we're fooling ourselves if we do anything else?
Well, there's no doubt we could do it. I think the one question we got to ask hard, and I know Secretary Hagel certainly raised this issue. I don't know with the president because I wasn't privy to those discussions, but he definitely mentioned it in public. We can destroy the Bashar al-Assad regime tomorrow. I mean, our military is more than capable of that. But we have to then look at what comes next. Are we willing to live with that vacuum? We certainly, I don't think, are going to back into, as you pointed out, another nation-building drill. We know that is a non-starter. So we got to think really, really hard before we kick the door down. I think as we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan, knocking out a hostile government is one thing, but what comes next is really the challenge.
Do we need to, as a nation then, and maybe even as an administration, finally say to ourselves at one point, we are the cops of the world. We've just got to go ahead and understand that nobody else is going to do it, and we have to stop listening to the rest of the world. We know we're going to make some enemies. We know we're going to tick some people off down the line, but if we don't do it, nobody will, and the entire world is going to be worse for the wear if we don't do it. I know that's a huge statement, and a lot of people will find a lot of errors in there and a lot of holes, but is that maybe where we've got to at least start if we're going to beat the enemy?
We got to have that discussion, Ed. I mean, we are the world's superpower. Nobody else can match us in a military or economic sense. And the other thing I will tell you, no matter what else we hear in all this hand-wringing, in a country like Iraq, Afghanistan, or Syria, those people that are in desperate need, like the Yazidi people up on Mount Sinjar, they're scanning the horizon for the arrival of American Marines or U.S. Air Force or U.S. Army or U.S. Navy. They're not waiting for the Chinese or Russians. Nobody spends time hoping they'll come and save them.
Is there anybody that comes to mind that would be the best choice as the new Secretary of Defense in your estimation?
I would just tell you there's a lot of quality candidates. Most of the names that have been kicked around right now, Deputy Secretary Ashton Carter, who just left office a little while back, Ms. Michelle Flournoy, who I understand is not interested in the job. Those are some of the names that have been mentioned. That's the type of quality people. And I will tell you the key thing, and I think the president's taken his time on this, he wants to get a bipartisan candidate. It cannot be a party hack. And he did a good job with that, with picking Secretary Hagel. You might remember he also kept Secretary Gates over from the Bush administration. So I think the president has shown a strong recognition that the defense of the United States is not a partisan matter, nor should it be.
But let's also go one step further. If he finds somebody who is that partisan hack, but even they might be the best person for the job, he can't dither here, can he? I mean, we're at war. We can't have a vacuum there. The enemy loves a vacuum.
Yeah, somebody's going to have to be named here pretty quick. Now, Secretary Hagel's still on the job. It's not like he packed up his desk and went home yesterday. But clearly, want to get the new person in there, especially if this new person is going to somehow change our policy or strategy.
We would only hope, some people would only hope that they do see a strategy. That, of course, is the next conversation that we'll hold for another time. But you, of course, have pointed out that we do have at least something there. Want to point out to everybody again that the book is called Why We Lost, a general's inside account of the Iraq and the Afghanistan wars. Lieutenant General Daniel Bolger is the author, a fascinating book and a must-read as well. Lieutenant General, thank you so much. A very happy Thanksgiving and a holiday weekend to you and your family.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving, and happy Thanksgiving to our troops around the world.
Well put indeed. Thank you so much, sir. Breaking, we're back with the cadre of mistakes being made by certain politicians. All of America would be thankful they corrected before putting their foot in their mouth again. It's coming up on MidPoint.